Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome back to another episode of The Hoarder. Now I know it's been a very long time since the last audio recap and I have a great excuse. I got sick 3 times in a row, and while I have still been running D&D sessions, my voice has not been in a state where I can do any kind of recording at all. That's why there haven't been any other videos either. So today is going to be a multi-parter. Several sessions in one video. So, in the last episode, the heroes escaped from Port Last and the Sword Coast entirely, got the highwaymen back, and decided that Chit was going to be their captain, for now. So, the members of the crew who escaped with them, I realized I didn't actually mention them in the first couple session recaps, because I honestly didn't think that they were ever going to come up again or be important. So on the ship we have Hoarder, who is a dwarf blacksmith who used to be a miner, but he got into an accident and one of his lungs collapsed, so he can't work that job anymore. So the heroes have it in their head that someday they're going to find a way to heal his lung so that he can go back to his original life and be happy. Because right now he's kind of miserable. There's the tavern keeper, Falgor, a human who kind of acts like a butler, very Alfred Pennyworth-ish, and the maid who worked in his tavern cleaning the place, named Clara, who is a lizard folk. There's also Parzish. You remember Parzish, he's the dark-skinned human merchant who tried to swindle the heroes, and he's gonna be doing more swindling, but not to the heroes. He learned his lesson, and there's no law out here on the ocean to protect him this time. And of course there's Tilda, who is going to be acting as the ship's engineer and bosun. As for roles, you already know that Chit is the captain. He assigned Serge to be the first mate, and Balthazar to be the quote-unquote second mate, which is a very uncommon term, but it does exist in real naval hierarchies. Zema is just going to be the crew's surgeon, and he's perfect for the job because he's magic. And Chit, being the only one with proficiency in, the ship and with navigator's tools and such, is also going to be the ship's navigator, so he serves 2 roles. Again, these are all temporary, on-the-spot decisions because they're kind of already out at sea, and they need to get their shit together if they're going to survive. Now, as for Elton, the former red bandit that the heroes kind of adopted, in the last session, he spent enough time in combat with them in order to gain enough XP to level. And yes, I do allow recurring NPCs in 5th edition to level like they did in 3.5. The way I worded it is that Elton already has 1 level in Bandit, which is his first level, so after earning over 300 XP, he gains a 2nd level, which I gave him 1 level in Expert, and he would gain another level between this session and the next. So he decided to take up Herbalism, so he's got an Herbalism kit, so the heroes gave him the resources he needed, along with all the resources that Parzish and Hoarder brought with them on board, to spend a couple of days on board brewing 2 potions of healing. He can also use thieves' tools now, but as of my recording this, he has yet to use them. Because the heroes keep finding other ways to open doors, and they kind of keep forgetting that he has that. But no biggie, he'll get to use it eventually. So, on the first day of sailing, Tilda explains how ship navigation works, at least in this campaign. There's wind, and there are currents. In this part of the world, the wind always flows to the southeast, being in the top right part of the clockwise spiral of wind currents on this hemisphere. No wind means you have to row. Sailing against wind or currents slows you down, sailing with them speeds you up. The exception to the current's direction is when you are near land, like within 50 to 100 miles of it, in which case the current will always flow toward land, but not the wind. The wind always blows in the same direction here. So, Their very first combat encounter is against some aquatic ghouls that climb up onto the ship. Nothing particularly notable happens in this encounter, but after they beat them, they decide to clip all of the ghouls' claws off of their hands, because I rolled that the claws still contain some of their ghoul venom, so each one has a one-time use ghoul paralysis poison in them. So they clip off a whole bunch of their claws, and Surge keeps one for himself because, Surge likes collecting trophies from his slain enemies. After that fight is against a dragon turtle wormling, who I don't know if any of them, Balthazar definitely knows Draconic, doesn't he? I forget, but none of them attempted to really speak with it. It doesn't really matter because the party got a lot of really lucky rolls against it. Even though this thing has a natural armor class of, 17, 18? There wasn't a single attack that they rolled that missed. They hit with all of their attacks. It almost killed Elton with its steam breath, but Elton, having a level of expert now, is now proficient in dex saves and managed to dodge most of it. And when it tried to escape, Balthazar got an opportunity attack where he crit for exactly 27 damage, which I showed them the little index card that I was tracking its hit points on, and that is exactly how much health it had left when it was trying to flee. So they killed it. The party got a silver coronet that it was wearing as an earring. They don't really learn any more about that particular bit of lore, but it doesn't really matter anymore. And the party has dragon turtle soup for dinner that day. Then the entire crew comes up onto the deck of the ship, and they set up tables and they have a feast. Now, speaking of the feast, during that fight, Surge triggered a wild magic surge that caused his feet to grow mushrooms everywhere he stepped. So after the fight was over, the party had him walk in circles for an hour, the entire duration of the effect, harvesting the shrooms he grew. And I did the math, and by the time he was done, they would have harvested 250 pounds worth of mushrooms, enough to feed the entire crew for almost a month. Their food problems were over, which is good, because Balthazar continuously failed to catch any fish during most of their time at sea. On the second day, while sailing, Surge spots an island to the north and the crew goes to check it out. On the way, they meet a friendly merfolk named Berlana, who warns them about someone named Old Snowblow who lairs on that island, but who shouldn't give them trouble since he's currently on his deathbed. She tells the party that she knows a spelunker of old shipwrecks, who she will bring to meet with them later. Now when they land on the island, they don't see anyone at first, just some rocks covered in snow, and they already think that they've gone too far north, because they were warned by Tilda that if they start seeing floating ice blocks or whatever, that means they've gone to the Arctic and need to start traveling south. However, when they start walking over these rocks, they begin to move, and they reveal themselves to be an enormous, absolutely colossal-sized white dragon. A white dragon great worm, to be specific. His name is Old Snowblow. Well, technically his real name is Nurtriorafelatar, but Old Snowblow is easier to say. He is too weak to fight the heroes. He is basically crippled at this point, lying on the beach and waiting to draw his last breath. He laments to the heroes that his hoard was taken by his niece, an ancient white dragon named Arveacharis, and without it, he cannot die in peace. What's worse than that is that his only remaining wormling son was snatched up by a portal filled with tentacles, leaving him without an heir. What's even worse is that his new home is already being invaded by Sahuagin, who sensed his death approaching. And yes, that is how I am pronouncing Sahuagin, because Wizards of the Coast can't make up their fucking mind about how it's pronounced. So that's what I'm sticking with. If you can prove that it's pronounced a different way, then I will change the way I say it. The heroes decide to drive off the Sahuagin who made camp on the northern side of the island, but by the time they return, Old Snowblow is already dead, and Parzish is trying to sell its teeth to the merman spelunker who's here now, claiming that he felled the beast. The spelunker, whose name is Karmov, trades the party some clerical vestments and a bone statuette of a Sahuagin with 4 arms. While that's going on, Balthazar and Zaymont decide to offer a prayer to Old Snowblow, and while they're up close to him, they notice that he has some kind of purple liquid dribbling from his lips. Elton, using his newfound knowledge of herbalism, is called upon to identify the substance, and deduces, and while he doesn't know exactly what kind it is, he knows that it's some kind of poison. The party interrogates Parzish, and they discover that he was indeed the one who poisoned him to death. Parzish tries to justify his actions. He was terrified of it. They were left alone with one of the most powerful creatures in all of Dungeons and Dragons, and he just wanted to finish it off while it was still immobile. But he notes that as he approached Old Snowblow, he didn't resist, and he actually opened his mouth as soon as he realized what Parzish was holding. He wanted it to end. Of course, now this means that the party realizes that Parzish has access to really strong poisons. He hints at having some connections with assassins back when he was starting out as a merchant in Neverwinter, before he eventually had to flee to Port Last. The party takes note of this new asset of theirs and keeps it in mind for later. That is where that session ended. Session 11. At the beginning of the next session, before the party gets ready to set sail, a huge portal made of water opens up on the beach. From it emerges 2 female water genasi asking to speak to the ship's captain. The younger, shorter one is named Swish, who does all the talking, and her older, taller, stoic sister is named Soak. They're representatives of Nura's Palace of Wonders, run by a Merid, a water genie, who seeks treasure from across the multiverse. Chet instantly recognizes the similarity to the Hoarder, and his suspicions increase when the genasi reveal that they've come for the Highwaymen, and are ready to offer 40,000 gold for it, twice as much as it's worth, especially considering it's not even an operable spelljammer at the moment. All kinds of red flags. In the end, the party says they need time to think it over, and the genasi declare that they will visit again next time they land somewhere. As they're leaving, Serge bears witness to the watery portal the genasi use, and it's filled with dread. It looks just like the portal that snatched up his mother. The rest of the day passes by mostly uneventfully, except Serge goes to talk to Parzish about potentially purchasing poisons for his pokey thing, only to learn how expensive they are. Additionally, Zaymont spends some time talking to Clara, the lizard folk maid. Nobody else really spent all that much time with her or gave her compliments or anything except for Zaymont, so he ends up spending a lot more time with her than anyone else on the ship. So she meekly brings up that tomorrow is Midsummer, a holiday where people can basically be hedonists for a day and pretend that nothing happened the day after. Words weren't necessary to describe what happened next during the session, and they aren't necessary now. That night the ship comes upon a group of Sea Elf scouts, whose duty it is to warn travelers about a kraken's territory that they were about to sail right into. They are advised to go around, and they attempt to do so. At midnight, the ship passes by a whirlpool. It's not big enough to suck in a 150-foot-long ship, but as they pass it, Parzish uses his spyglass to see that at the bottom of the whirlpool is a massive pile of gold coins and other objects. Balthazar and Chit decide to tether themselves to the ship and dive into the water, already aware because Parzish succeeded on his perception check, that there are creatures waiting for them, specifically 2 Murrow, ready to ambush whoever came for their horde. After easily dispatching of them, though, they claim a bunch of gems, a shipwreck sculpture made of rainbow coral. Balthazar claims and attunes to a pair of slippers of spider climbing. Serge attunes to a +1 wand of the War Mage. Zaymot gets a shiny new +1 Warhammer. And Chit attunes to a shield-shaped brooch whose effects he currently has not discovered. As for the gold, turns out it was mostly copper. It's hard to see specific colors underwater. So Chit decides to give all of that copper to Parzish, which he is very happy about for some reason, even though it only amounts to a few gold. For some reason, he seems really happy about getting all of this copper. Very suspicious, Chit thinks. The next morning, Zaymot, Tilda, and Elton were on deck when they came within 300 feet of a rock formation, on top of which was the silhouette of a woman that they could hear singing. Instinctively, Tilda and Elton begin rowing as fast as they can toward the rock, showing no sign of stopping, and whenever Zaymot physically tried to stop them, he was compelled to leave them be. When the rest of the PCs came up to see what was happening, they all fell under the spell as well, except for Serge, the only one to make his save. So he shot the woman with a firebolt and stopped the singing. The woman revealed herself to be a harpy as she flew up into the air, accompanied by her 3 sisters. The harpies took turns staying in the air and singing whenever the crew broke free of the spell, because you had to save against each harpies singing in order to become immune to it, trying to get them to ram their ship into the rocks. Serge almost died at one point when he was fighting a harpy up in the crow's nest, when a wild magic surge triggered and caused him to cast Fireball on himself. It knocked him unconscious, and the damage from the fall would have killed him had Balthazar not been there to break his fall. After a potion of healing and several healing spells made to keep Serge alive, the entire crew manages to break free of the spells, drive off or kill the harpies, and steer the ship away from the rocks to prevent it from crashing just in the nick of time. Once again they find thousands of copper pieces within the harpy's rock, and once again they give it to Parzish, who once again seems unusually happy to have them. That night at midnight, the crew spots an unconscious man floating on a piece of wood. When they rescue and resuscitate him, they recognize him as one of the men in blue that they met on the bridge back in Neverwinter Wood. He introduces himself as Marlock, but before he can answer any questions, the ship is suddenly attacked by 4 giant octopuses, one of whom seemed to be leading the rest, and which had eyes that looked like rubies, just like Gorshak did, and just like the fiendish giant spider from the very first session. As they tried to fight them off, Tilda was knocked unconscious, and that might have spelt the end for her, but she rolled a nat 20 on her first death save and instantly woke back up with 1 HP. The same could not be said for Marlock, however, who was not so lucky. The first lead they got on the crystal rod had his spine crushed by an octopus tentacle in the second round. When the ruby-eyed octopus saw this, it spoke. "This is what you get for defying me." Then it and the other octopuses retreated and swam to the northeast, and Captain Chit gave the order to follow them immediately. End of that session. Session 12. At the start of the next session, the PCs are giving chase to the giant octopuses. Balthazar finally manages to catch something the next morning, a net full of quippers. Later that day, someone spots a large green humanoid figure swimming toward their ship at an incredible speed. They decide not to take any chances and fire a ballista bolt at him, but the ballista jams. They take that as a sign and simply brace themselves for his arrival. The man climbs up onto the deck very casually. He's a hulking figure with green skin, fins on his face and limbs, a long, crooked nose, and lots of marine life growing on his back, like coral and barnacles. He begins speaking in an arrogant tone, but no one on board can understand the language. Despite that, it's clear from his gestures that he intends to bully them into giving him money. Zaymod rolls a nat 20 on his knowledge check, this is going to become a recurring theme, and somehow knows exactly what this guy is. He's an aquatic variant of a troll, a race of giants that can regenerate any wound unless they take fire or acid damage. So, that's exactly what they use. The troll's cockiness disappears as Chit successfully pins him to the ground and Surge burns him to death. On him, they find a sack of coins, likely pilfered from other sailors. This will never come up again, but the troll's name was Glubbick. Rest in peace, Glubbick. That evening, someone spots an island on the horizon in the exact direction that they're headed, which is strange because the current is actually flowing to their left. And the reason that's strange is because in this region, water flows to the southeast if it's not flowing toward the nearest landmass, and the water isn't flowing in either of those directions. Nevertheless, the heroes decide to make a beeline for it and see what happens. Night passes, and the skies get dark. Clouds blot out the stars and the wind picks up. Slowly, the island they were sailing toward disappears from view, and it begins storming. At this point, all the most important members of the crew have to make checks, using the rules from Ghost of Saltmarsh. If they fail, the ship will be damaged and the crew's quality score will lower. But, miraculously, every single check was a success. They weathered the weather perfectly, and the crew's quality actually rose. As the storm passed and the island was no longer in view, they realized the darkness and the clouds prevented them from knowing which direction the ship was facing. But the next morning they found themselves sailing toward a different island entirely, one with a port town. As they're sailing toward the island, Tilda timidly brings up that she never had time to install a way for the ship to properly dock. They didn't have an anchor. That, and there was the possibility of docking illegally since they weren't being expected. So they decide to park on a nearby beach, which is covered in snow. Most of the area is. And when they splash onto shore, they see a few skeletal corpses there, one of which is surrounded by fancy possessions. All of the skeletons are fully clothed, but none of the clothing looks rotted. Very suspicious, the party thinks. Surge, who between now and when they got them is now the one attuned to the slippers of spider climbing, walks along the hull of the ship and avoids touching the snow. But he can see that the front of the hull where the snow splashed onto it was devoid of barnacles. The snow cleaned them off. Chit grabs one of the fish Balthazar caught and tosses it onto the snow. When he does, the fish's flesh instantly turns to snow, leaving only fish bones. "Don't touch the snow," Chit warns. While trying to figure out how to get the ship unstuck from this killer snow, Chit uses his mage hand to carefully remove the belongings from the skeleton and examine them. On him were a pair of winged boots, which Zaymod attuned to, a cloak of elven kind that Balthazar attuned to, a set of painter's supplies, and a scroll case containing a painting of the island as viewed from the sky. Zaymod uses the winged boots to carry himself and Surge over to the port town to ask for help. There, the frightened townsfolk confirm that they have indeed finally reached Gundabad, capital of Gunderlin Island. The boatswain, whose name is Arnold, explains that the sapping snow has necromantic properties and is deadly to living material. It spreads from the northwest, where undead were first sighted 6 years ago. They agree to rent the heroes a rowboat so the rest of the crew can escape the beached highwaymen. Once Chit arrives, the townsfolk begin whispering to themselves about, quote, another hippo guy. After giving the crew shore leave and paying them for their services up until that point, the heroes are pointed in the direction of the town's castle, just up the hill, where King Olger Redax resides. Halfway up the hill, however, the two water genasi from before, Silk and Swish, appear before the heroes once again to ask for the highwaymen, now that they're no longer in a situation where they'd be stranded without it. Chit outright refuses, knowing that something nefarious must be afoot if they're willing to trade a working spelljammer, plus the cost for another one, for a broken one. Chit actually promises to make the trade if the Genasi tell him why they want it. Swish gets angry and pulls out her crossbow. A fight ensues, but the Genasi are simply no match for the heroes, mainly because everyone focused solely on the back-rank archer first and took her down, and Surge turned invisible and climbed onto Soak's back, constantly distracting her. As soon as Soak realized it was a lost cause, she threw down her swords and begged to go help her dying sister. Zaymot cast Spare the Dying on Swish, while the rest of the party interrogated Soak, who spilled so many beans that day. She revealed that her mother, the genie Nuva, was rivals with someone named Quasazar. And because Quasazar wants the Highwaymen, Nuva does too. This whole thing has been a petty treasure-collecting race between two quasi-deities. Soak then expresses disdain for Chit, saying that he lied because even though he now knows the reason they wanted the Highwaymen, Chit would not keep his promise to trade it. Except Chit does keep his word. He accepts the offer to trade the Highwaymen for not only a working spelljammer, but also the remaining 20,000 gold they'd have after that. Unfortunately, Soak laments, she has no idea how Swish or Nua were actually planning on making the trade, physically speaking. So instead, Soak gives Chit a parchment containing the coordinates needed to reach Nua's palace once it's capable of flight. Just bring the Highwaymen there and we'll make the trade, she says. She then throws the unconscious Swish over her shoulder and goes back through the water portal, which promptly closes. With that situation out of the way, the heroes continue up the hill toward the castle. The guards instantly mistake Chit for a different hippo person, but Chit quickly corrects them. He explains that they bear information regarding the fate of one of the blue bandits and are promptly let in. Inside, they meet with King Ogre Redax, named for the blood-stained great axe hanging on the wall above him. They proceed to have a rather expository conversation, where Redax explains that his family and the citizens used to be savage tribesmen, but left that life behind in order to found a more modern civilization. When the Zephyrath Empire caught wind of this, they sent emissaries to enlist the newly founded Gundabog into their ranks, promising wealth, power, resources, and protection. Redax accepted their offer, but had nothing to give in return. That's when Salvador Stromkin revealed himself. Salvador told Redax and the Blue Bandits about a valuable treasure located somewhere in the Neverwinter Wood, the Crystal Rod. The Blue Bandits were sent to find it, but never returned with it. Chit reveals that they met a member of the Blue Bandits out at sea, but was killed before they could get any info from him. At some point in the conversation, the heroes unveil the painted map of the island they found in the corpse outside town. King Redax reveals that it was he who commissioned the elven painter to create this map, but it seems he picked a most unfortunate spot to land. As the king examines the map, he notices something out of place. A picture of a shipwreck in the southwestern corner of the island that he did not know about. The heroes know a plot hook when they hear one, so they decide to head there the following morning. In the meantime, though, they decide to do some shopping in town. When they get back to the tavern, Captain Chit gives everyone the sour news that he agreed to trade the Highwaymen. None of the crew members are happy about that, and Tilda is especially pissed given all the hard work she did on the ship. So, remember in the previous video when I mentioned mutiny? That's exactly what happens. A mutually beneficial mutiny, mind you, where Chit is stripped of captain status and the role goes to Surge. Which does mean Chit is a mere navigator now. Which means Chit no longer owns the Highwaymen and therefore can't rightfully trade it away. Good news for everyone, right? After that, the heroes decide to do some shopping and take in the sights. They see the common folk are unusually jubilant compared to their grim demeanor from earlier. All of the shops that were closing down before were being cleaned and reopened, and a large crowd of merchants were gathered in the square, with Parzish in the spotlight. He had somehow come into thousands of foreign gold pieces, and was buying trinkets and supplies from the locals for a fraction of their value. Chit immediately knew what was happening and pulled Parzish away to scold him. Remember all those thousands of copper pieces Parzish was given? Well, between Balthazar and Dothwinter's painted great axes, and him mistaking the copper in the whirlpool for gold when he first saw it, he got the idea to paint the copper pieces gold, and trade them with the not-so-intelligent former barbarians of Gundbarg, pretending that they were foreign gold pieces. The damage, however, is already done, and Parzish says they probably have 10 days before the paint begins to chip off the coins. When Chit tried to sell something to the townsfolk after that, he was paid half in real gold and half in fake gold. Copper. He realized that they wouldn't be able to do much selling here at all and just decided to buy instead, specifically a clockwork amulet for 100 gold. As the heroes were finishing up their exploration of the town, one last sight caught their eye. The farms outside the walls were fairly typical, with livestock, horses, and wagons, but among the beasts of burden were huge elephant-sized creatures that seemed humanoid, but that walked on their enormous arms like gorillas and had turtle-like heads and tails. The keeper called them Hoarder, and said that while they weren't fully tamed yet, they could still be ridden upon after a short introduction to their rider. They decided that it might be a good idea to rent some come the following morning. Session 13. This session was somewhat uneventful. The heroes rode their Hoarder, who they named Skittle, Alex, and Rolf, down the southern beach of Gundolin toward the shipwreck. Chit and Balthazar had some trouble befriending their Hoarder and had to pacify it with a barrel of ale. Chit bought a backup barrel to bring with them just in case. When they reach the shipwreck, they find that it's been occupied by a tribe of Kuotoa. Its sailors hung from the mast. After leaving their Hoarder on shore, easily fighting their way through the ranks and infiltrating the ship, they come upon a locked room just below deck. Chit knows the layouts of sailing ships pretty well, having spent the last half a decade working for a sailing company. He knows that this is the chamber pot room, and looking into the adjacent broom closet, he can see that both of its walls, left into the chamber pot room and right to the outside, had huge holes in them that had been boarded with wood and reinforced with iron. From within the locked room, they could hear slurping and slithering sounds. Zaymot used his scroll of clairvoyance to see inside the room. In it, he sees a horribly large mass of flesh and tentacles that fill almost the entirety of it. It has 3 legs, a massive drooling maw of fangs, and 3 tentacles, one of which has its 3 eyes and nostrils on it. Zaymot rolled a nat 20 on his knowledge check, again, and knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a normal Otyug. This was a Neo-Otyug, and it was feasting on the rotten bodies of 3 humanoids dressed in blue robes. The party decides that the crystal rod must be on their bodies, and when the Neo-Otyug notices their presence, it begins speaking to them telepathically. It pretends to be an innocent woman, starving and trapped for air. The PCs know it's a farce, but it doesn't know that they know, so they tell it they're going to find a way to open the door and leave it be. For now. That's where that session ended, and there are 2 more sessions to recap, but the next session deserves its own video.